science.
Suffice it that the blood of 1,000 men and women was spilled within these walls. Limbs twisted and broken, eyes gouged from bloody sockets, flesh burned black.
Please. You await the dead. In death, there are no accidents, no coincidences, no mishaps, and no escapes. What you have to realize is that we're all just a mouse that a cat has by the tail.
The number you have reached, 911, has been changed to a non-published number.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to World of the Unexplained. I'm Jay Scott, your only JD DJ on the Omni Sound Radio 1 network, and sitting with us tonight is Chuck Browder.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Yeah, I guess I did your intro for you.
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, that's cool. and we have a guest with us. Laura is from I guess Winston. Okay, Laura's with us today. She's doing some sound engineering stuff at Guilford Tech, and so we're pleased to have her here with us tonight, hanging out and checking out what we're doing tonight. For all of you people, you guys know how big of an Elvis fan that I am, and anyway, tonight we have Bill Beeny, the owner of the Elvis is Alive Museum, and we're going to tell you, Bill not only owns the best museum in the world, Bill also has conclusive DNA proof that Elvis faked his death. So without further ado, we're going to bring on Bill.
Very much.
Hey, how you doing, Bill?
I'm doing fine.
Awesome.
I appreciate the invite.
Oh yes, we appreciate you coming on. It's an amazing thing that we've seen. With your what I've seen on the internet anyway. I've had to look around for it. I was hoping you had a website out there, but I couldn't seem to find one.
Well, we have a stream radio site, and that's the reason we don't have the website. We have the website for the DNA book. Then we have Mighty Stream Radio, where we broadcast Elvis all night from 12 midnight to 6 a.m.
Oh, okay. Well, I've got the Sirius radio. You know, the Elvis radio, Elvis all the time, 24/7.
There you go.
What's that address for the radio streaming that you do?
MightyStreamRadio.com.
Okay. And what's the address for the book? ElvisDNA.com. ElvisDNA.com. Now, who wrote the book? Did you write it, Bill?
I wrote it, yes.
Okay. How long ago did you write it?
Published in Boston, and we've been around to some Barnes and Noble places doing some book signings, and it's got to a good start.
Awesome. Well, tell us what inspired you to open the Elvis is Alive Museum, and when did it start, and why did you do it?
Well, it was sort of an evolutionary thing. I had as a sideline business a 50s cafe. My primary business was a real estate developer in this area. I've been doing that for some 30 years.
Okay. And
we opened this 50s cafe, and it featured all of the 50s icons, John Wayne, Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, Elvis. And then about 1990, Elvis began to loom up so much larger than the others. The stamp came out, and his record sales were booming, and people would come in, and the times that I would be at the cafe, they would ask me questions about Elvis. They'd say, "Do you think Elvis is alive or dead?" And I said, "Why, of course." At that time, I said, "Of course he's dead. Well, why should I think he's alive?" And they said, "Well, for this reason." And then they would beginning to bring up things that didn't seem quite kosher for a dead man. They'd say, "Why didn't the family collect a $3 million insurance policy from Lloyd's of London?" And I'd say, "Well, I don't know." Because Graceland, at the time of his so-called funeral, was flat broke, contrary to what most people think. They had moved Gladys's body over from the Memorial Gardens to the cemetery that they got a zoning change in order to get there at Graceland, and they moved her body and Elvis's body supposedly. The strange thing was that they didn't bill for Elvis's body, but they did for Gladys, and it was $31,000.
Wow.
And Graceland didn't have that much money. The point is, Graceland was flat broke at that time.
And they didn't collect the insurance.
So if they were offered $3 million, had Elvis truly died, they were entitled to it. What person broke would turn down $3 million?
I sure wouldn't.
I wouldn't either.
And so they would ask me questions like that, and I'd say, well, I don't know. Then they asked the question, well, the autopsy report says that the body in the casket weighed 170 pounds, and it was well known at that time, at that stage in Elvis's career.
He's a big guy.
He was quite obese. He weighed 255 pounds.
Wow.
So that brings the question, how do you lose 85 pounds going to the morgue? And on went these questions, and it kind of piqued my interest, so I took it as a hobby to begin to try to look into some of these. I talked to some people that had played in his band. Later, I visited in Memphis with some of his very close relatives. And the more that I began to check the facts, the more I began to doubt that the man in the casket was Elvis.
Okay.
This continued on for a couple of years, and then my son has a law firm in the St. Louis area.
Oh, really?
We were doing a show, a radio show with the Wake Up crew in Memphis, Tennessee. They were the #1 morning program, and they had me on about once or twice a month to discuss Elvis.
Okay.
And a doctor called in and said he'd like to talk to us off the air. So when the show was over, my son and I called him and talked to him. We were in our area. We were doing this by phone. And the doctor informed us of his name. He has a large clinic in Memphis. And he said he lived next door for many years with next door to Dr. Harold Sexton. Well, Harold Sexton was a famed pathologist who was kind of the dean of pathologists that had done 2 biopsies on Elvis in 1973 and 1975.
Okay.
They thought that Elvis might have hepatitis because this is what had killed his mother, Gladys. And then he participated in what was supposed to be, the cadaver was supposed to be Elvis, and Dr. Sexton participated in that. He told the doctor that called us, he said, I know you're a big Elvis fan. He said, I've got tons of stuff that I've done about Elvis, and I've saved extra copies of everything that I've done because he is so high profile. If I'm ever sued, I want to have backup information firsthand.
Oh, yeah.
And so he said, but if I die before you, I'm going to will you all this material. Well, Dr. Sexton did die before our caller doctor, and he did will him all of this material. So the doctor told my son and I, if you'll come to Memphis, I'll show you everything that I've got. So we made a date, and we drove down, went to his home, a large, palatial mansion with the guard dogs and the locked gates and the whole 9 yards. Very, very wonderful gentleman, Southern gentleman type, down to earth. And after we'd had dinner at his home, he took us in. He said, now here is some of the material that Dr. Sexton had willed to me. He brought out a large stack of papers. He said, this documents every day that Elvis had been in the hospital, in the Baptist Memorial Hospital. And it looked like perhaps 1,000 or 1,500 pages.
Wow.
Then he brought out the only known copy, as far as I know, that exists that wasn't sealed by a court order of the complete autopsy report of Elvis. The family ordered the autopsy. That way they could keep it private. Normally, when a body dies unattended, the state does the autopsy. But they ceded to the family doing the autopsy so it could be sealed and nobody could read it. And so Dr. Sexton, who had participated in the preparation of this autopsy report, kept an extra copy in event he would be sued. He gave that to the doctor. Now, the doctor wouldn't sell me a copy or wouldn't let me copy his copy, but while he talked to my son, he said, you can peruse through it. The very first thing that I saw told me that the body in the casket was not Elvis. On the very opening of the autopsy report, they always make remarks about any scars that's on the cadaver, so that the old scars would not be mixed up with the current investigation as to the cause of death. Mm-hmm. And the first scar that they mentioned on this cadaver that was supposed to be Elvis was that he had a long scar from the thorax in his neck all the way down to his groin. This was an old scar. At some point, this man had been split open, and it sounded like that was probably for open heart surgery.
Wow.
Well, Elvis had never had anything like that. Mm-hmm. And so that told me immediately this body could not have been Elvis. Later on in the report, they mentioned that the cadaver had MS, multiple sclerosis. Elvis had never had multiple sclerosis. So I perused through that for about 30 minutes, and then the doctor brought out some slide tissues, slides that had the tissues of Elvis and the individual who was buried, the cadaver. He had two small slides with a tinge of liver compressed in between two pieces of glass to preserve it. He said these are the biopsy specimens, one for 73, one for 75. They were dated and they were labeled with the Baptist Memorial Hospital name on them, so they were authentic. Then the doctor brought out a cubicle of either plastic or paraffin that was about 3 inches square. And this had a large specimen of human flesh because it was taken from the cadaver, so you didn't have to worry about injuring him. Mm-hmm. And this piece of specimen was about as big as the last link on your thumb. And he said this was taken from the cadaver. And after we had discussed them for a moment, we began discussing the live dead issue. And the doctor said, well, I don't see any reason to think that Elvis is alive. I think he's dead. And I said, well, the evidence I've garnered at this point, after 2 years of investigation, indicates to me that Elvis was not in the casket. My son said, well, frankly, I don't know. So then my son brought it up. He said, well, Doc, there's one way we could settle this. And he said, how's that? He said, if you will let us use these specimens that we know were specimens of Elvis's biopsies, the two biopsies, mm-hmm. and we know this was the specimen of the cadaver they buried because they were all carefully labeled. He said, we could send them off to a reputable DNA lab, and so that the notoriety of Elvis doesn't influence it, in case some of those in the clinic might have been Elvis fans or detractors of Elvis, we'll label them John Doe 1 and John Doe 2 and see if they match. If they match, then Elvis is dead. He was in the casket. Mm-hmm. If they don't match, then the man in the casket was not the same one that was the entertaining Elvis. Huh. The doctor agreed to let us do this. And to make a long story short, we sent it off to LabCorp in Burlington, North Carolina. The doc said, I'll
It's just up the road from us.
Pardon me?
It's just up the road from us, about, 40 minutes away?
That's not too far from me.
Yeah, it's really close.
This laboratory is highly credited. And the doctor said, I'll contribute the the tissue, and my son said, well, I'll contribute my legal services because the chain of custody is very important. We have to keep the chain of custody, which means that anyone who handles this tissue while it's en route to the laboratory, and once it gets to the laboratory, they have to sign a notarized affidavit saying they have not changed it or done anything to meddle with these specimens. So, like a dope, I said, well, I'll pay for it. I thought, what's $100? Well, I wasn't familiar with DNA. It turned out to be $2,600. So we sent them off. It took 60 days for them to come back. And the results was that the two first specimens were alike. Of course, they both came from Elvis' liver. Mm-hmm. But they did not match the cadaver, the man who was purported to be Elvis. They were different people.
Oh.
So I called the doctor, of course, because I had to rub it in. And when he answered the phone, he said, and I found out who it was, he said, yeah, I know what you're going to say. He said, I don't understand it, but he said, I know the specimens were accurate, and I know that the man in the casket now, I know was not Elvis. So I'm sorry to draw it out so long, but that was the gist of how we got involved with the DNA.
Huh. That's amazing. It really is amazing.
Sounds like a smoking gun to me.
Well, who do you think's in the casket?
Well, I have some suspicions, but I can't prove it. So in my book, I didn't go into it. I will throw this out, and I want everybody to know that I'm not saying this is a final fact because I can't prove it as a fact. But the colonel, who was Elvis's longtime manager, of course, Colonel Parker, he had a stepson who died on August the 16th, 1977. When asked about it, he lied and said, no, he died in April. But later, upon examining his death certificate, it was determined that he died the same date that Elvis was supposed to have died. It is further fact that he was supposed to be buried in a certain location in Palm Beach, and at the cemetery, no one ever heard of this cadaver, and there was no record he was ever buried there. And then another telltale sign was that he was severely afflicted with MS, multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
So that is some interesting possibilities, but I cannot say that Colonel did, by the way, said that Elvis needed a way out. He was miserable being Elvis Presley. Mm-hmm. His life was being threatened because of the heavy work that he was doing with the FBI and the DEA, and he said he needed a way out, and I showed him a way out, and he took it.
Huh.
So for whatever that's worth, that's the closest that we could come to identifying it, but it's not a positive identification by any means.
Now, if Elvis was still alive today, he would be, what, 81 years old, 80 years old?
No, he'd be 72.
Oh, okay, okay, I missed that.
He was born in 1935.
All right, yeah, okay, that's right. 72 years old. So do you think...
He's still a young man. I'll be 80 my birthday, so I look upon him as a young man.
You know, my grandfather, he moves around really, really good, and, you know, he just turned 81, so, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So 72 years old. Do you think Elvis is still alive?
Yes, I do. If I was going to be a betting man and place everything I own on a bet, I would bet that he is alive.
Where do you think he's at?
We have other evidence other than this that leads me to say that.
Okay.
I received a call about 3 years ago from Elvis's only living aunt, Aunt Lois Smith. Her husband was Elvis's mother's brother, and he was the guard at the gate for many years before Graceland became commercialized. And she invited me to come down and talk with her. She said her health was not good, and there's some things she wanted to tell me. She had seen some TV shows that I'd been on, and she lived in Memphis, and she'd heard the regular bi-monthly interviews I did on the morning show with the boys on radio. And so I set a time up, and I took a radio personality friend of mine, and we went to Aunt Lois's, and we did a 3-hour interview. Among the other things she said, the most prominent thing she said was, she kind of reminded me of a granny in the Beverly Hillbillies. And she said that feller that they had in the casket was not my nephew. Said he was working with the government, and he was getting a lot of threats on his life, and they made a way out for him to pretend that he died. And then from there she went on with elaboration. Some things I can talk about, and some things I pledged not to talk about.
That's understandable.
But she later came up to St. Louis, and I had her on a couple of national television shows in which she said the same thing.
Huh. Wow. That's wow.
Yeah.
that's you know, I don't know. I guess what I would really want to know is, do you think that when Elvis Presley does pass, do you think the truth will come out?
Yes, I do, for one primary reason. Elvis's prime concern when he was performing, all the way from when he was a young performer on up to Aloha from Hawaii in his latter years of performing, his main concern was pleasing his fans. He would go out of his way to please the fans. And I believe, and Elvis was an honest type person. He was a country boy, and he was honest and straightforward, and he loved his fans. And I believe that he did what he had to do. The side of Elvis working with the government was a whole nother issue. And at that point in his life, he didn't have many options. And I think that when Elvis does die, I believe that he has left instructions that the whole story will come out.
Huh.
Now, I can't prove that, but that is knowing his character and his personality and his love for his fans. I think he would want them to know what he did and why he did it. Very recently, we had the Presley Commission, headed by Phil Aitchison, who had a group of policemen, law enforcement people, and businessmen, did a 2-year in-detail study of every facet of the day that Elvis supposedly died, and what happened before that and what happened immediately after that. This was an independent study, and when they finished their study at the end of 2 years and Phil wrote the commission report, their report was that there is no question that it was not Elvis Presley that was in the casket.
Okay, Bill, I'm going to stop you on that note. We have to take a short break,
Okay.
and we'll be right back with Bill Beeny, the owner of the Elvis is Alive Museum. You can call us here in the studio at 800-960-2289. We'll give that number when we come back. Hang on the line with us, Bill, and we'll be right back with you on the break.
All right, that's fine.
Right after this.
There are some things in this world that go way beyond human understanding. Things that cannot be explained. Things that most people don't want to know about.
But we're going to talk about them anyway. World of the Unexplained with Jay Scott and Trent Blackie. Heard Mondays live from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern on the OmniSound Radio 1 network.
Right here, baby.
www.omnisoundradio1.net.
And we're back here, World of the Unexplained. Thanks, Chuck.
You're welcome, man.
Bill, are you still with us? Bill? I think Bill's still with us. Bill, are you with us?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, we thought we lost you there for a second.
No, I was talking to my son. Just came in. I told him I was on the line, not to pick up the phone.
Oh, okay.
I'm calling. I'm at home now.
Okay, great. Well, you know, you hear a lot of talk about. Let me give those numbers real quick. Actually, Chuck, you want to give them?
Sure. The numbers here are 1-800-960-2289. That's 1-800-960-2289. Locally, if you're here in North Carolina, it's 336-996-1596.
And also, you can join us in the chat room at omnisoundradio1.net and just hit chat and make up a name and register. It doesn't take but a few seconds. Come in. We've got about 7 people in right now. Not a big crowd tonight, but it's going to pick up. You know, but call in and ask Bill any question you want about Elvis. You know, you hear a lot of talk about Elvis's work in the, you know, with the federal government. What exactly did he do? Because I'm not really that much aware about, you know, I've just heard stories about him operating with the federal government. What exactly did he do that got him into so much trouble?
Well, Elvis always had a penchant for wanting to be in law enforcement. I think it goes back to his early days when he was a small child. He had the unfortunate incident of seeing the police come and carry his father away. Vernon had forged a check along with a couple of his brothers. He'd sold a hog for $4, and he changed the check to $40. And he was given 3 years in Parchment Penitentiary. They frowned on that in that era on bad check writing. And his mother said that Elvis always talked about he didn't want to be locked up in jail. He wanted to be the policeman. And he did a lot of benefits for policemen, the Los Angeles Police Department, the Denver Police Department. A lot of them made him honorary police personnel in their particular area. And then one day Elvis got on a plane, didn't tell any of his staff where he was going, and he flew to Washington, D.C. President Nixon was president. He went up to the gate and he said, I want to go in to see the president. And they said, well, who are you? Do you have an appointment? He said, no, I don't have an appointment. He said, I'm Elvis Presley. And they said, well, the president doesn't see people without appointment, and it's very difficult to get an appointment. He said, well, you just take him this note, and Elvis scribbled out a note on a piece of scratch paper, and the guard, sure enough, sent it in, and here come a guard and said, President Nixon said, bring him in. He'd be happy to see him. And so Elvis went right in and talked with Nixon, and the gist of it was he told Mr. Nixon that he met a lot of people. He knew a lot of things that was going on that was bad in this country, especially in the category of drugs. Oh, yeah. That's the reason that I don't believe these reports that Elvis was hooked on drugs, legal or illegal. The DEA would never have made a man an agent at large who was a druggie. That would have been suicide.
Oh, yeah.
And Nixon took him into the DEA office, and as a result of that, he was made both a FBI informant with a badge and a DEA agent at large. At that time, all DEA agents operated in a certain region. But because Elvis traveled around so much, they made an exception and made him an agent at large. Now, a lot of detractors of Elvis said, well, these were just honorary badges. Not at all. If you go to Graceland, you go to the trophy room, you will see there a letter from the Justice Department to Elvis thanking him for the service he provided by letting an FBI agent play in his band for 2 years from 74 through 76. Doing undercover work.
Bill, we've got a caller.
All right.
Hello, caller. You're on the air. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is John calling from Messina, New York. How are you
John.
Tonight? Oh, I have 2 questions for your guest tonight. I'm curious. I don't know if this has been brought up yet. The National Enquirer photo of Elvis in his casket Does that look like a wax dummy to you?
Well, a lot of corpses look like wax dummies. Not ever. A lot of them have a pasty look. The picture, I know the one you're talking about, and it was taken by a second cousin of Elvis. The National Enquirer paid him $10,000 to take the picture with a secret hidden camera. That cadaver was much younger than Elvis and much lighter than Elvis. There was a time that there was a lot of speculation that there was a wax dummy in the casket and that there was an air conditioner in there because they wondered why he had so many pallbearers. He had 10 pallbearers, which was an unusual amount, and the casket was heavy, and they stumbled at one point, Billy Smith said, who was Elvis's cousin and a pallbearer. But after all of our investigation, I believe that that was the same cadaver that they did the autopsy on, and I think it was a body. But a lot of cadavers do look, and you're right, they do look like they might be a wax dummy.
Okay. Do you think it's possible that Elvis, if he did die, was buried someplace else so no one would end up stealing his body like they did with Abraham Lincoln?
Well, there was an attempt to steal Elvis's body when he was over in the gardens where they first interred him, beside his mother was interred there also. And that was the reason that Vernon got a change in the zoning at Graceland to permit a home cemetery. And it was then that Elvis's body allegedly was moved and Gladys's body was moved to a more secure place. And when they buried it at Graceland, they put 2 tons of granite on top of the casket and the vault that it was in, so no one would ever disinter the body.
Wow. I didn't know that. Okay.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
Also, I've noticed that on his marker, is the middle initial wrong on his tomb marker?
The middle name is misspelled on the marker.
Okay.
It is spelled Aaron, which is the Old Testament spelling of Aaron. But Elvis was named Aaron, Aron, and on the outside of the wall up until recently, they had it spelled Aron on the Graceland walls by the gate when you go in. But then when you go in and see the grave, it is spelled Aaron, so there was a discrepancy there. And his marriage license, all of his Army papers, he signed it all as Aron. So the question arises, why did they purposefully misspell his name on his grave? Because it's very evident that it wasn't a mistake, because you could make a mistake, but you go back and correct it on your name. You don't purposefully normally misspell your name on your own grave. The nearest thing I can figure is this: Elvis was a truthful man. He loved his supporters and his fans, and I think that he just cringed about having his name on his grave saying "I'm dead." But if it was misspelled, then that would change it to where it wasn't indeed Elvis Aron Presley.
Wow, thank you.
Another little tidbit that a lot of people don't know, they have a marker at the foot of Elvis's grave, Jesse Garon Presley, who was his twin that was stillborn at birth. Now, the baby wasn't buried there. The baby was buried in Price Cemetery in an unmarked grave, and still lies in an unmarked grave to this day. But they misspelled his name also on the marker. So that is a kind of a double oddity.
Okay, does that do it for you, John?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks for calling in.
Wonderful show.
Thanks. All right. So you were in the middle of telling us a story. I'm sorry about the interruption there. What were we talking about?
The correlation between Nixon and the PR with the DEA, him being made, and
yes, he fed information for years, and they have it there in Graceland in the trophy room, where they thanked him for letting an undercover agent play for a little over 2 years in his band, gathering information on some drug lords. And recently we got 3,500 pages of FBI files donated by the Presley Commission and by Gail Brewer Giorgio, who had written a bestseller book about Elvis being alive.
I tried to get Gail Giorgio to come do the show, and I apparently she doesn't want to. So,
well, she has a mother who is very ill, and she is kind of withdrawn from the Elvis scene. In fact, a lot of her material, Phil Aitchison brought up with him, and he and Gail donated this to the Elvis is Alive Museum.
Okay.
But these documents document how, especially right before his alleged death, Elvis assisted the FBI in one of the biggest mafia bust-ups that they'd had in the entire decade that he had last lived in the 70s. There was a group in the Caribbean called the Fraternity. It was headed up by a man by the name of Peter Frederick Pro. His mafia tentacles went all the way up to John Gotti.
Wow.
And they were scamming businessmen and personalities, movie stars, people with a lot of money. And the FBI had not been successful in busting them. In fact, Interpol was working on it. And Elvis had a Jetstar plane. He had 3 jet planes, and he decided to sell one of them because it was a big drag on Elvis. And this was one of the things that Elvis hated and wanted to get out of. He was supporting about 285 people at the time that he quit performing. And he had to go day and night to raise enough money to pay all of these salaries. He had 3 jet planes with pilots sitting around. He had band members and so forth and so on. So he decided to sell this jet plane. And the FBI approached him when they learned of this and said, will you participate with us in a sting operation? Let us advertise it in the Miami paper because they're working in that area, and see if they'll take the bait. And so they did run the ad for the Jetstar plane, and they did take the bait. And they called Elvis and said they wanted to come up. They agreed to pay $1,200,000, and Peter Frederick Pro took a commercial plane up and said that he would fly it back and that he had the cashier's checks to pay for it. He met them there at Graceland and showed them the cashier's checks, and Vernon said, well, I want to call and make sure they're good. So he called down to an island bank. I don't know if it was Bahamas or it was one of the islands. And a lady answered and said, the Bank of the Caribbean. And Vernon said, I've got Peter Frederick Pro here, and I've got $1,200,000 in cashier's checks. I want to know if they're bona fide. And she broke in and said, oh, yes, said, Mr. Pro is one of the most reputable persons that we have here, and he's as good as gold. You don't have to worry about him. And so Vernon thanked them. It turns out this woman was sitting in an empty room with a desk. She wasn't in a bank at all. She was the front to cover for him. So they sold him the plane, gave him the keys, and he flew away in it. And later they used it at his trial. He bragged on the black box that taking Elvis's jet plane from him was like stealing candy from a baby. The checks all bounced. They were no good. He was in parts unknown, changed his address. But the FBI was monitoring all of this and his every move. And the FBI waited until he resold the plane for $1,200,000, and then they moved in and arrested the entire crew. It was such a big bust and so dangerous that one of the mafia guys ratted on his friends. They usually, get a weak one and work on him, the FBI, and he turned evidence on the others, but they rushed him into a witness protection program because it was so dangerous they would have killed him.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Elvis, most people don't know that he was supposed to appear before a federal grand jury on August the 16th, 1977, the day of the funeral. And he was supposed to testify to a grand jury against Frederick Proe. But what the FBI did, they had him to do his testimony in an affidavit form some days before. And then he conveniently died. In examining our FBI records, we find that they state in there that Elvis got over 300 death threats and a lot of kidnap threats for Lisa Marie, and he was petrified about this, so something had to be done.
Are there transcripts available of those affidavits?
The FBI files are available if you'll write to the FBI office in Washington, D.C., and pay for the duplicating cost. They will mail them to you.
I'm sure they already know who we are, so it shouldn't be a problem. They won't open a new file, I don't think. Wow.
It was up till recently that they had not released about a little over 2,000 pages of it because there were still some FBI officials, agents working who were mentioned in these files, and until they retire, they wouldn't blow their cover. But they finally retired, and they did release them, and you have to get it by going through the Freedom of Information Act. That's the way we did. We got 963 pages originally by going through the Freedom of Information Act.
Now, how much did that cost to duplicate all those?
It was a few $100s.
That's what I figured. Yeah, we're definitely not going to be ordering those here. But, I'm surprised.
If you get by the museum, you're more than welcome to sit down and read them. We have them out where people can examine them and read them.
That's cool. Tell us. Well, first I want to say this, but I'm surprised someone hasn't gotten them, paid for them, and then scanned them and put them on the internet somewhere. Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure somebody probably has. But now tell us exactly where your museum is located, Bill.
We're in a little town called Wright City, Missouri.
Okay.
It's so small on a windy day you can spit across town. It's about 1,200 people.
Wow.
It's on Interstate 70, 50 miles west of St. Louis.
Okay, that's I've been in St. Louis years ago. I've been to Cape Girardeau. I'm trying to place where you're at in my mind, but it's not working. It's been a long time since I've been there.
Blown my mind. Our museum is not large. It probably has 400 or 500 square feet in it because it's not a museum of objects that Elvis had owned. It's an informational museum. We do try to captivate the people's imagination. We have a casket with a mannequin in it. The mannequin doesn't look like Elvis, but neither did the guy they buried. So we were on track with that. We have a replica of the grave of Elvis with the misspelled name. And then we had a famous local artist who painted a picture of Elvis that normally she would have sold between $2,000 and $2,500. She donated that to the museum. Then we have, beyond that, information about handwriting of Elvis done after he died that has been vouched for by handwriting experts. We have experts, voice print experts, that have examined the tape that Elvis made after the funeral that was highly touted. And we have that tape, and we have it on a player where they can play and listen to it.
What's on that tape, Bill?
The tape was a call that Elvis apparently made to a relative in which he was telling them what he had been doing and where he was. And the tape was sent off and checked by the known voice of Elvis in Dallas, Texas, by a voice print expert that worked for the Dallas Police Department. And they said that it was, in fact, the voice of Elvis Presley.
Well, how do you authenticate that and know that it was made after his death?
Because he talked about things that happened after his death.
Oh, okay.
He talked about the shooting of Ronald Reagan, which happened in the 80s.
Wow, okay.
So what year was this recording presupposed to have been recorded?
The recording was made sometime in the late 80s, apparently, which would have been, 13 or 14 years after the funeral.
Huh. Okay. Wow.
And this is strictly...
It's a museum of information as opposed to relics that Elvis had owned. And it's free. We don't charge for it. Graceland threatened us when we first opened and had... the Associated Press had come out and they learned of it, and their attorneys said that he suspected that they'd have to shut us down with a restraining order, that they owned the rights to the name and the image of Elvis. I called the attorney to try to see if there was a common meeting ground, and he said he was very insulting, very condescending. He said, evidently, you hillbillies up in Missouri don't know that down here in Memphis we own the rights to the name and the image of Elvis Aaron Presley, but said you wouldn't know that. And by then he'd had my dandruff up, which is pretty hard to do. I don't get addled very often, but I retouted, well, evidently down there in Memphis, Tennessee, I said, evidently you rednecks never heard of the Constitution of the United States that says we have freedom of speech. We don't charge anybody to come in and see the museum. We're not making any money on it. Conversely, it cost me several $1,000s. And you need to brush up and read the Constitution, which says if I want to say Elvis is alive, I have the right to do so.
Yes, you do.
And so he said, well, you'll be closed within a week, and I haven't heard from him since.
Oh, well, with that, we're going to take another short break. Bill, hang on the line with us. We'll be right back here at World of the Unexplained. Give us a call, guys. You can call us up here at 1-800. Give them the numbers, Chuck.
Sure. It's 1-800-960-2289. Once again, it's 1-800-960-2289. Or if you're here in North Carolina locally, it's 336-996-1596.
And I played a Beatles song here last time, but Elvis song here last time, but it looks like I'm going to have to do the Beatles right now. I didn't have it in rotation the way I wanted. So you guys can listen to some Beatles. And, well, anyway, we'll be back here in just a moment after this.
OmniSound Radio 1 Network wants to pick your brain. Just go to www.omnisoundradio1.net and take the 3 short-question R-Radio survey. It's quick, it's cool, and it'll give you that warm and fuzzy feeling all over. Mm-hmm. Who knows? It might even help make us a little better. Oh, baby. Yeah, right. OmniSound Radio 1 Network.
And we're back here at World of the Unexplained.
It's all good, man.
It's cool. Okay. Wonderful World Radio. Bill, you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. Anyway, we had talked before that that you are a retired Baptist preacher. Is that correct?
Well, I'd say semi-retired would be more like it.
Okay.
On our stream radio, we have gospel programming during the day, and I do several programs on that. And then we have gone and taken what we call Voices of the Past, and we have gotten recordings of the great preachers of the past, and we air them at different intervals. That gives people a view of what they sounded like years ago.
Oh, wow, that's neat.
It's been very successful.
And is that also available at MightyStreamRadio.com?
Yes, that's
okay.
all, during the day. We have the gospel programming and singing. Stuart Hamlin was a good friend of mine. We use him a lot. He wrote It Is No Secret What God Can Do in This Old House. And
oh, wow.
he tells stories of his escapades. He lived next door to John Wayne, and he and John Wayne and Clark Gable were big hunting buddies.
Wow.
And
Wow.
he is a natural-born storyteller, and so we have a lot of shows with him on there, and the Blackwood Brothers Quartet and the Statesman's Quartet were all my friends. J.D. Sumner, who sung backup for Elvis, was a good friend of mine, and we have all those fellows on, and we just have a great time with it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Now, the site that your book's on, that's ElvisDNA.com?
ElvisDNA.com, uh-huh.
All right, I'm going to put that up in the chat room so people can go to that and take a look at it if they want to see it. All right. The question that I have is did the government play any part in the disappearance of Elvis Presley? Did they help him hide himself with witness protection or something like that, do you think?
All of the indications that I got from talking to Elvis's relatives was that they were involved. I got a call from NBC. They wanted to know if I would come to New York and be on their show. And I agreed to do that, and they flew me up there. And after I got there, they told me, well, actually, they said, we didn't tell all of it. We're going to have you to debate some of Elvis's bodyguards.
Oh, my gosh.
And I said, well, that's fine. I have nothing to hide. So they had, I was in the studio live. Mike Jerrick, who is now with Fox News, was the host. And they had Red West and Marty Lacker and about 4 or 5 of them on the telephone. And then I was in the studio, and they more or less poo-pooed the idea that Elvis was dead and tried to make me look like a nut. Of course, a lot of places do that, and that's the only time that I get short-fused. I will not do an interview where there were these shock jocks. I've had them that come on and they try to be smart and try to be cute, and I just cut them off at the knees and say that's it. If you want intelligent conversation, I'll be glad to stay as long as you like. If you want to try to show how cute you are and make fun of me, then you're wasting my time.
Exactly.
And I've hung up on a lot of them. In fact, the big shock jock, Howard Stern, wanted me to go, and I said no.
Oh, God.
That would be a disaster.
Oh, I can see that now.
We had a very heated argument, and Red West said, well, I should know that Elvis was dead. He said, I was there, and I looked at his body in the casket, and I grew up with him, and you didn't, so what do you know? So we went to a commercial, and I said to the host, Mike Jerrick, I said, Mike, he's lying, because Elvis had fired him and the rest of these guys, and they were persona non grata. They couldn't come around Graceland, and he wasn't at the funeral because they wouldn't allow him at the funeral, and he wrote a very bad, nasty book about Elvis, and Elvis fans even turned on them. And I said, when the commercial's over, ask him, is he sure he was there and looked in this casket like he just described? So we came back after the break, and Mike said, are you sure, Red, that you were at the funeral? I have information you weren't there, that Graceland had banned you from the premises. And there was kind of a long silence, and he said, oh, that's right, I forgot, I missed the funeral. So
I forgot I missed the funeral.
It got pretty heated before it's over. Red West has got a hair trigger temper, and he wanted to come and bash my brains out. And I was glad he was on the phone in the studio. But we ended it up, and I came home, and 2 weeks later, the producer of that show called me up and said, would you come back and do another show with the bodyguards? And I said, why? And they said, well, we got a real high rating on it, and not only that, but we just read in the London's version of People's Magazine that the bodyguards said that they were in a meeting with Elvis, and he told them that they were going to have to be relieved of their job because he couldn't take the pressure anymore of Graceland and the threats he was getting, and that he had hired a double, and the man was terminally ill, and the day the man dies, Elvis, they said in the article, told them that the day the man died, the world would think that Elvis had died.
Oh,
and in
wow.
turn, he had agreed to support this man's family as long as he, Elvis, lived. And so the producer of the NBC show said, I want you to come back on and confront them with this, since they tried to make fun of you like you were a nut. And I said, they're not going to come back on because they know I'll rub it in on them. and they called me back in a couple of hours and said, yeah, they wouldn't come back. They said he'd just make fun of us. But we did do a second show, and I debated Elvis's half-brother, who is a Baptist minister, and we got along fine. Yeah. But that story, Aunt Lois told the same story that the bodyguards wrote in the magazine that Elvis had paid a man. Aunt Lois said one day her husband, Johnny, came in from the gate and said, Lois, you're not going to believe what Elvis just told me and Joe Esposito. And she said, what is it? Said, well, you're as pale as a ghost. And he said, yeah, I've got a right to be. He said, Elvis told us that we were all going to have to get a job. He'd give us a bonus and give us time to get other work, but that he had hired a man that he was going to use as a double. The man was terminally ill, and the day that the man died, that he would die. In fact, Elvis had said he had just been there and paid for the man having his eye color changed.
Oh, my gosh.
And while I was on the NBC show, NBC had a FBI agent on there. And they asked him the question. They said, could Elvis have pulled this off by himself and faked his death? And could he have done it with the government's help, since he was heavily involved with them? And the FBI agent said, with Elvis's money, he could have easily faked his death and gotten by with it. Mm-hmm. Said many people, said hundreds of people faked their death for criminal reasons, primarily to collect insurance. Yeah. And they're never heard from again. It would have been easy for him to do. But he said if the FBI was in on it, it would have been doubly easy, because they can fake documents and make anything say whatever they want them to say when they put you in a witness protection program. So it is my belief, I don't have categorical proof of it, but all the evidence leads to the fact that the FBI did assist him in repayment for the years and years of service that he afforded them.
Now, I have another question, Bill, and it goes back to I don't know exactly the theory behind it, and I may be wrong when I say that I think Gail Giorgio proposed this in her book, and like I said, I may be wrong. I've read it somewhere, and it may have been there, but there's some kind of connection with Elvis's daughter being in Europe, and some kind of connection with money. And does this make any sense? Yeah,
that was me instead of Gail.
Okay, all right. Then I may have read something that you had been in or heard you somewhere.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Well, usually I don't do both interviews in the same one, because it's enough to say Elvis is alive, and then when you say Lisa isn't really Lisa, then I think you are really a nut. But I'll get into it just a little bit and tell you, just in a kind of a synopsis of what it's about.
Okay.
I had a gentleman who came when we had the 50th Cafe, and I was out of town, and he waited several hours for me to get back, and he was a young, handsome fella, Swedish origin, blonde hair, and the purpose of him coming, he said, I wanted to inform you, in case you hadn't already known about it, that Michael Jackson's wife is not Lisa Marie Presley. And I guess my jaw kind of dropped a little, and I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, she is a double. Said when Lisa was 9 years old, because of all the death threats that her father had and kidnap threats, there was one time that Elvis got a package and he opened it up, and in the package, this was in his last days before the funeral, in the package was Lisa Marie's favorite teddy bear. Somebody had got into the mansion, got the teddy bear, took it out, and mailed it back to him with a note saying, if you testify before the grand jury, we can get to your daughter at any time we want to. And it literally scared Elvis to death. Huh. And so this fellow told me, he said, shortly after the funeral, Elvis's wife, ex-wife or wife, they never really were divorced, Priscilla, along with Mike Stone, her fiance, who was her karate teacher, took Lisa to Europe and left her there with a relative. And with the thought that when she's 25, according to the will of Elvis's will, when she's 25, she was to inherit everything. Vernon was supposed to figure into it, Elvis's dad, but he had died. Aunt Minnie May, or Grandma Minnie May, the grandmother, Elvis's grandmother, was in the will, but she had died. And one aunt was in the will, but she had died. And then other than that, Lisa was to get everything. So they took her over there to leave her for security reasons, he said. Then he gave me some names of people to verify this. And so I began to do some investigation of my own. I've got a large kind of a archive of material going back, different clippings and newspaper articles that we have garnered through the years. And I began to search for Lisa right after the death, and lo and behold, it loomed out at me in a newspaper article. It said Mike Stone and Priscilla were in Vienna with their young daughter Lisa Marie, and when asked what they were doing in Europe, Priscilla told them that she had brought young Lisa over because of the kidnap threats, and they were going to leave her with one of Elvis's relatives. Huh. And so he said that's what they did. And the fellow whose name I learned later was Alex said they left her with Elvis's mother's first cousin, would have been Elvis's second cousin, and pretended that she was their daughter, and she went to school over there. But he gave me the name of a lady in Fort Lauderdale who had grew up with Lisa in Sweden. She was a Swedish lady, and she knew the whole story because she grew up with her from the time Lisa was 9 years old and went to school with her, and Lisa had confided in her. So I called the lady, and she did confirm that this was all true. And I set up an appointment to drive to their home. So I went to Fort Lauderdale and met her and spent some time with her and her husband. And she said, yes, he said, we were 9 years old when Lisa entered our school, and we wondered what in the world was going on because she knew perfect English, but she didn't know any Swedish. And she was supposed to be born there in Uppsala. And so I began to follow up on it and check it out. And then later I did more research, and the research turned up the fact that there was something to this. And then Lisa asked if she could come over and visit me from Sweden. And the strange phenomena was she had never worked. Her husband didn't work. He was a photographer, more as a hobby. And they lived in a $500,000 home. So she came over and spent the weekend at my home, and I talked with her, and I quizzed her, and I questioned her. And then I called Aunt Lois Smith and quizzed her, and Aunt Lois said that she never did believe that Michael Jackson's wife was Lisa Marie. Said she tried to talk to her on one occasion. They had a party with a Church of Scientologists, which both Priscilla and Lisa, Michael's wife, was heavily involved and is heavily involved with the Church of Scientologists, a cult. And Aunt Lisa said she tried to talk to Michael's wife and ask her some questions about things that nobody would know but her and Lisa. and said Lisa didn't want to talk about it and was very rude to her.
Huh.
So she said, can I talk to the Swedish girl? So Lisa Marie flew down to Aunt Lois and spent a weekend with her, and she asked her the same questions, one of them being, what was your favorite toy that you played with that your daddy had a cage built for? And this had never been in the news. And the Lisa from Sweden said it was a little green snake that I found in the yard. And Aunt Lois beamed and said, that's exactly right. She said, what did you do the day of your dad's funeral that got you into trouble? And she had asked Michael's wife that, and she didn't know and got very angry. Said, how do you think I could remember that far back? And the Lisa from Sweden said, the way I got in trouble, I was playing pool with Billy Smith, Daddy's cousin, and I shot a ball too hard, and it flew up and hit a picture on the wall and busted the glass. And Aunt Lois said, that's exactly right, and said that has never been in a paper anywhere to her knowledge.
Huh.
So there was a good deal of information. We did have her to do a DNA, and she willingly agreed to do it, and we compared it to the DNA we had of Elvis, and she checked out 95%.
Wow.
The same DNA. Now, in America, that is not enough in a paternity lawsuit to be a child. You need 99%.
Okay.
But in Europe, the standard is 95%. She would have been classified as Elvis's daughter on the standards they have in Europe.
Huh.
She went to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and had them to do a facial profile like they do if a child is lost and they're trying to determine which child belongs to a certain parent. And they took a known picture of Lisa when she was 9 and checked it against the picture of Elvis and Priscilla. Then the Royal Canadian Mounted Police took the two pictures of Michael Jackson's wife and the Lisa Marie in Sweden, and their conclusion was, after a long, involved study, was that the girl in Sweden was the daughter of Elvis Presley. The main thing that they said ruled out Michael Jackson's wife was that her cranium, her skull, was 10% smaller than young Lisa Marie's skull was when she was 9 years old, and that it's physically impossible for your skull to shrink. Where the other girl skull was about the same size as the young Lisa. Of course, you get your skull size in full at the latest by the time you're 10 years of age.
Okay.
Your head develops that fast.
Huh. Wow, that's a lot. Jeez.
She has a lot of evidence. In fact, she wrote a book, I, Lisa Marie. It's sold out now, and unless you find a copy somebody had or in a rummage sale or something. For a period of time, my son represented her in that he wrote Priscilla to try to get her to have a meeting with her daughter, and said she's not wanting any money, but she wants to know why you never came back to Europe to get her. And Lisa told me, she said, Mom would call me and we'd talk back and forth, and twice she came to visit me in Sweden, and she always told me that she would come and get me when I was 25. And she said, I was shocked. Just a few months before I was 25, I was watching the news, and there was my mother with a strange girl saying, this is Lisa. She's been out of the country and just returned. And she was in her early 20s, and her mother would never talk to her after that. So it's kind of a sad story, but Fox News heard about it in New York, and they wanted me to talk Lisa into doing a documentary on it. And Lisa was scared to death because she had death threats. She was scared of the Church of Scientology. It was her view that the Church of Scientology wanted to take over Graceland because of its wealth. And they were known for swindling movie stars and different people that had more money than they had brains.
I just asked Tom Cruise.
Out of their money, like Tom Cruise and some of those cats. And so she was scared, but I finally convinced her to do it. She said, well, I will do the interview on one condition. If you'll come over and be with me on the interview in case they try to trick me or pull something, that you'll be there to protect me. So I said, well, if they'll pay my way, I'll go, but I'm not going to pay my way to Stockholm and back just so they can have a show. So Fox agreed to pay my way, and we were making, and they said, before we go, we've got investigators over there. We want to check this girl out because she's a fraud. We don't want to waste our time and your time. So I said, fine, I don't want to waste my time either. So they took about 2 weeks. I don't know how those guys get all the information they do, but they called me back, and they said, we found out enough that we think this girl is for real. Said, first of all, the lady who's supposed to be her mother over there isn't her mother because we found her medical records. She had a hysterectomy before this girl was born, so she couldn't have a child. They said we further learned that she was being sent large amounts of money from Graceland over to a bank in Japan, and then it was kind of laundered there and then sent over to Sweden to support them, that they have taken care of them ever since the girl was born. And I know that for a fact to be true because when they came over here to visit with me, and we're just going to be here a week, they were talking about buying a new car so they'd have something to drive and then sell it when they left a week later. And I said, you don't want to do that. You'll lose hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. I said, we've got an extra car. You can drive it. And he said, well, that's nothing, just the cost of a car. And, in fact, she was over here about 3 weeks ago, and I had a chat with her. She came over for the weekend to visit her friend that she grew up with over in Sweden. And we had another chat. And her daughter, it turns out, Lisa Marie's daughter, the one in Sweden, she has a daughter that has the highest IQ that any child ever had in Sweden. She's on all the talk shows over there. And she is very talented musically, and came over with her father, Alex, and did a demo and took a month's training by a trainer who's got over 1,000 people waiting to be trained because he's trained some of the biggest icons in America. But this girl somehow was able to be put to the front of the line and spent a month being trained by him and has got a record contract. She's 11 years old, and they have her in the university in Sweden. She entered the university when she was 9. She has such a high IQ. So I'm to get a copy. Lisa told me she was sending me a copy of her record. I don't know who the record contract is with, but she's sending me a copy of her CD.
Oh, wow.
So that's a whole other story, and I usually don't try to do it, just to say Elvis is alive is a mouthful there.
Oh, yeah. It is. It really is. But what do you think? I don't know. What do you think? Where do you think Elvis is now? Or do you know, or do you purport to even have a clue?
Well, there's some things I can talk about and some things I can't talk about. Lisa told me a lot, and one of the things that impressed me with her, she was coming down from Springfield, Virginia, where she had some friends up there, and she was coming with this friend of hers from Sweden who was kind of acting as a nanny because she has 2 small daughters. And the 3 of them and her husband Alex were driving down, and they got about halfway here, and Lisa called and was rather panicky and said, we have gotten some very serious death threats. And she was always petrified something would happen to her children. And she said, I am sending the children back with the nanny that's with her, and Alex and I are coming on down, and said, I'm going to get some bodyguards. And it turns out that she called me when she was in Illinois, right across from St. Louis. And she was in a certain hotel and asked me to come over. She didn't want to come into St. Louis. She was afraid that she'd have these death threats again. So I drove over there. When I knocked on the motel door, 2 big bodyguards met me and said, "We got to pat you down." And they were in the process of doing this. And Lisa said, "That's Bill. He's all right." And one guy said, very professionally, said, "Nobody is all right. You've hired us to protect you." We went out to dinner, and she told me, or rather the bodyguards did, I got talking to them. One of them was a high-profile CIA agent, former agent, who had worked down in Guatemala, and the other one was a former FBI agent. And so that impressed me that at the snap of a finger, this girl could get 2 very high-profile government bodyguards to drop everything and come and protect her. And that told me that she had a lot of clout right there.
Well, do you know if Elvis is in the United States today, or do you think he's in some other country?
I think he travels around a good deal. He loved Hawaii. He liked Germany when he was in the service over there. And I think, in fact, he has spent time in Graceland, because if you go to Graceland, no one was ever allowed to go upstairs at Graceland. Even the maids and the workers and guards, no one, period, was ever allowed to go upstairs at Graceland.
Huh.
So Elvis could be anywhere. People say, "Where do you think he's hiding?" I don't think Elvis has to hide. He would be 72.
I've got a call, Bill. Hang on just a second. Hello, caller. Trent, is that you? Hello?
Scott.
Yeah, Trent.
Hey.
Hey, Bill, I want to introduce you to my co-host. He's on his honeymoon right now.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks, Bill.
Hi. Good to chat with you.
Oh, yeah, fantastic.
You haven't seen Elvis while you were on your honeymoon, have you?
No, he didn't. I don't know how much he likes going looking for whales or anything, but you know.
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, it's kind of late in the conversation. What have you guys not covered?
Well, we plowed quite a bit of ground tonight in the hour and a half or whatever we've been on.
Oh yeah.
About an hour and 35 minutes thereabouts.
Sure. Have you gone over the DNA evidence and that bit?
Yeah, we did that the first thing.
I reckon so. Have you gone over where Elvis is now? You know, where
we were just in the.
We were just talking about that.
Process of talking about that, and I was about to say, when we think of Elvis, we think of a young black-haired entertainer, either in a gold lame suit or a jumpsuit.
Right.
It's hard for us to visualize Elvis as a gray-haired man in his 70s, possibly with a mustache or a beard. The Presleys grayed very young. Elvis's father was totally gray when he was 25, and Elvis would have been gray at probably in his 30s had he not started dyeing his hair. He loved his mother something fiercely, and his mother dyed her hair black, and that was one of the reasons that Elvis started dyeing his hair back, because he wanted to be like his mother.
Oh, well,
Elvis could probably, I often say to the people at the museum, Elvis could probably come in, and if he didn't talk and if we didn't see his blue eyes, he could probably look around and we wouldn't give him a second thought. You don't think of Elvis
certainly
being an old gray-headed man.
Yeah. So I mean, possibilities are endless, really. I mean, if he's careful about it, you know, we wouldn't recognize him.
All right, guys, we're gonna have to take a short break here. If you guys will hang on the line with us, we'll be right back here in just a second on World of the Unexplained. This is Jay Scott and
Chuck Bratter.
Chuck finally speaks. All right, we're gonna take a short break and we'll be back right after this.
You're listening to the OmniSound Radio 1 Network, bringing you the apocalypse with a twist of lime. www.omnisoundradio1.net.
And we're back here, World of the Unexplained. We've got Bill Beeny, the owner of the Elvis is Alive Museum, as well as our co-host, Trent Lackey, who's on his honeymoon now, and luckily his new wife has allowed him to participate briefly for, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a good thing you put that in there, Scott. Yeah, she'd be a little bit irate if you didn't say thanks to the missus.
Yeah.
Well, I think I kind of got a question here, Bill.
All right.
If Elvis isn't, he's an old man, he's gray, and does he still have connections to the wealth that he has, or has he been legally separated, to sort of stay on the down low, not to leave a paper trail between him and his millions? I mean, and if that's the case, would that affect his his retirement, so to speak?
I believe from the evidence we have, which is a little sketchy, but I believe that Elvis is in control of the wealth of Graceland, because if in fact he did not die, then his will would not be in effect, and if his will was not in effect, then Lisa would own nothing and Priscilla would have nothing, and so I think that he still is in control of the wealth, and probably by proxy in some way or another engineered the recent sale that they had to Silverman of 85% of all the assets of Graceland.
Well, okay.
What do you think of Elvis Radio on Sirius Satellite? With they've got what's that guy's name? Used to I can't think of his name now.
I'm not really that familiar. I knew that it was there, and I knew that they broadcast 24 hours a day, but I really don't know the details, so I couldn't speak intelligently on that.
Okay, that's fair. Wow. Okay.
So how is Elvis's retirement then? I mean, is he fishing in the Gulf? Is he?
That's what we were just talking
America?
about. He moves. He probably moves around a lot.
Or is he back in Tupelo? Hanging out under an assumed name.
The lady that lived in Fort Lauderdale, Maria, I'll just use her first name, who grew up with Lisa, said that she was having dinner. Her and her husband was having dinner with Lisa. Lisa lived with her for 3 years in Fort Lauderdale before going back to Sweden, and said they were having dinner, and her husband punched her and said, Maria said, "Look at that man over there." Said, "He looks like an older version of Elvis, doesn't he?" And so she said, "Yeah, he really does." And said in a moment, Lisa got up. She didn't say anything and went to the ladies' room, and when she did, the man that they were talking about got up, and they met in a hallway and stood there and talked for about 15 minutes. Then he was dressed in jogging suit with a baseball cap, and he left and went out the door and got in a car and left. Lisa went to the restroom and then came back and didn't say anything, and said up until the next day, the middle of the day, she didn't say anything. Finally, she said, "I know you two are wondering about who it was that I talked to." She said, "That was my father," and said, "He told me that he was going to be leaving and I wouldn't see him for a few months, and that I would get a very bad report that he had been killed, but said, 'Don't worry about it,' and said, 'I will be back in touch with you when I can.'" And she said that about 6 months later, they were on the beach there at Fort Lauderdale, and Lisa and the two girls were up just a little ways from them, and a big limo pulls up, and a man gets out of the back seat, and he was the same man that was in the restaurant. And he came down and walked by them, didn't say anything but nodded to them, and went up and sat down on the beach and talked to Lisa and played there a little bit with the two girls, holding them in his lap and talking to them. And then after about 15 minutes, he got up and left and went back up and got in the car and went away. But in the interlude before that visit, she did get a call and said the man didn't identify himself, but said, "I've got bad news, Lisa. Your father was killed in a scuba diving accident in South America." And she said because of what her dad had told her in the cafe, she didn't really worry about it because she figured that was a part of the program.
So
she said one thing that made me believe that she was authentic. When we first opened, I alluded the fact that Graceland's attorneys said they were going to close me down at the museum, and he threatened to do so on the phone. And this wasn't carried by any news, and nobody would have known what was said on that phone call except me and that attorney. When I met with Lisa and her two bodyguards over on the east side of St. Louis, we were having dinner and talking, and Lisa said to me, "There's something I really appreciate about you, Bill." And I said, "Well, please tell me, because there's enough people knocking me right now." And she said, "I appreciate the fact that you never ask me a lot of questions about my daddy. You don't try to pry and learn things." She said, "People that knows who I am worry me to death, always prying, wanting to know information." And I said, "Well, Lisa, I figured that's between whatever you know between you and your father. And if you wanted me to know anything, you would tell me, and I will never pry into your private affairs of your family." And she said, "I will tell you one thing that you probably wondered about." And I said, "Well, what's that?" She said, "You got a call from one of Graceland's lawyers sometime back threatening to close you down and called you a hillbilly." And I was a little shocked, and I said, "Yes, I did." She said, "You know, Graceland will sue about anybody that infringes on the right of the name of Elvis." I said, "Yes, I know that. I know several people they have sued." She said, "Did you ever wonder why they didn't sue you?" And I said, "In fact, I have wondered why many times, because I expected them to make good on their threat." And she said, "Well, the reason that they didn't sue you was because my father said, 'Leave him alone. He's doing a good thing.'" So she knew private information that no one could have known unless the attorney or somebody close to him had told him that.
Man, that's quite a tale.
So I'm assuming that you've never had the opportunity to actually set up any kind of meeting with him or see him.
No.
And the other question I have is, has the government ever threatened you in any way? Have you ever received any strange calls or any strange government visitors in relation to what you do with the museum and everything?
No, if they came there, they would under a guise of being a reporter or something, but to my knowledge, they have never done that. I got one call right after we opened. My secretary came in rather pale and said, "Bill," said, "my goodness," said, "Elvis Presley is on the line." And I said, "Sure he is." Being just opened and the thing as radical as an Elvis's Live Museum, we were doing 10 or 12 interviews a day. And I thought it was a disc jockey. So the voice came on the line. It sounded more like Elvis than Elvis. And he said, "I'm not Elvis, I'm John Burroughs." Well, that was an alias that Elvis used with the FBI. When they wanted him to come to the phone at Graceland, they'd call for John Burroughs, and he would drop everything knowing that it was the FBI. So I kind of laughed. I figured it's a disc jockey. So I said, "Well, John, I'm glad to know you. I'm Seville." That was the other alias that Elvis used. It's Elvis spelled backwards. And so we both got a laugh out of it, and the guy sounded identical to Elvis when he laughed, and he said, "Aren't you afraid that you're endangering the life of Elvis by saying that he's in a witness protection program?" And I said, "No, because the FBI has said that they have never lost a client that stayed in the program." And then the guy said, and sounded identical to Elvis, saying, well, if they had have lost a man, do you think they'd admit it? And I laughed. No, I don't think they'd admit it. And he said, I don't either. And then I was expecting many to say, well, this is John with WKOZ or whatever, and laugh. But instead of that, he said, well, I think your museum is doing a good thing, and when I get the opportunity in my schedule, I'm going to come by. And he said, God bless you, ma'am, and hung up.
Wow.
Who he was, I don't know. I never tell anybody I talked to Elvis because I have no idea who he was, but I'm quite sure he wasn't a reporter or he'd identified himself.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
But I've met a lot of interesting people. This is a hobby with me. As I said, we don't charge people to go in the museum, and I have had the privilege of meeting a lot of people that were close to Elvis. J.D. Sumner, who used to sing with the Blackwood Brothers Quartet, was a very close friend of mine, even before he went to sing for Elvis. He was one of the closest men in the entourage that Elvis had, because he wasn't a hanger-on like the rest of them, who were, for the most part, there just to get what they could from Elvis. J.D. sincerely loved Elvis, and there was one time that Elvis wanted to make a test of who was really his friend and really loved him out of all of his bunch. So he set up a scenario where a guy would burst through the door with a blank gun and start shooting just to see what the reaction. Elvis was always pulling wild pranks. The man burst through the door and started shooting it, screaming he was going to kill Elvis. And the bodyguards all either took out the door or jumped behind the couch or under the piano, except for J.D. Sumner, and J.D. ran over and knocked Elvis down and lay on top of him. And
wow.
Elvis gave him a $100,000 ring and threatened to fire the rest of them when he revealed to them this was just a hoax.
Oh, wow. Wow.
But Elvis was a character. When they traveled by bus, they had a orangutan, and the orangutan that rode with them would like to jump on top of them and mess up their hair. And so they were staying in this one motel, and they had this lady, middle-aged lady, who was the cleanup lady. So they told her, they said, go in and clean her room while we're have gone out to eat. So they watched until she came across with all her buckets and everything, and they had unscrewed all the light bulbs and turned the switches off to where it was totally dark in there. And she went in there and shut the door, and this thing loaded on top of her. And they could hear her screaming, and they locked the door from the outside.
Oh, my God.
And you could hear it said, I have a block away, and they finally got afraid the woman was going to have a heart attack, so they unlocked the door and pushed it open and ran. And here she comes staggering out with her mop buckets and all, and the killed was right behind her.
Poor lady.
They were constantly doing things of that way.
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm going to have to leave, guys.
Okay.
Bill.
I'm glad to have met you, even if it was by phone, and
I know.
On your honeymoon.
Oh, thank you very much. And I'll have to check out the archives and maybe come by and visit the museum sometime.
If you ever get around the St. Louis area, then we'll give you the royal treatment.
All right. Scott, we'll talk to you later, buddy.
All right, you going to say bye to Chuck?
Bye, Chuck.
Take it easy, Trent.
I'm sorry.
It's all good, man.
He's so quiet, you know? Okay.
All right, Trent. We'll talk to you later, Trent.
See ya.
All right. Okay. Well, now the phone lines are open again, 800-960-2289, 800-960-2289, or locally 336-996-1596. We're here with Bill Beeny, the owner and operator of the Elvis is Alive Museum, and author of the Elvis DNA book. Now, Bill, does the book go into more detail than what you're giving us here tonight?
Oh, yes. We've got photocopies of the DNA, and we've got information of how we got it, and then we've got a lot of other reasons other than the DNA evidence that we have why we believe Elvis is alive. And then one chapter, Phil Aitchison of the Presley Commission writes it, and he gives a minute-by-minute scenario the day that Elvis is supposed to have died, showing that it could not have possibly been Elvis. So we cover a lot of ground in the book, and if they want to order the book, they can order it online and just go to elvisdna.com, and it'll tell you all about the book, and you can order it with your credit card right online there.
How much is the book?
$12.95.
That's not bad. That's not bad.
That's not bad for a book nowadays.
We got another caller, Bill.
All right.
Hello, caller. You're on World of the Unexplained.
Hi, it's Laura.
Hey, Laura. How are you?
I'm doing good. Hey, I was wondering if your guest knows how Elvis feels about all the impersonators. Maybe I missed that part, but I didn't hear you mention it.
I have no way of knowing how he feels, but there were some impersonators that when he was alive and when he was performing before his alleged funeral, that performed, and he was totally comfortable with it. Now, Priscilla had banned them from anywhere around the Graceland area or their restaurant or anything, and threatened to sue them. In fact, they did sue an impersonator in Las Vegas, and they lost the lawsuit. So they dropped the idea of suing Elvis impersonators. But as far as Elvis himself, I think Elvis was very comfortable with the impersonators, and probably the worse they were, the bigger kick he would get out of it.
Yeah, it does seem kind of funny to think about someone being alive and having, like, so many impersonators of yourself running around.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of good ones, and there's a lot of them very close, and there's some horrible ones. Like anything else, when you go to impersonate them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Laura.
Bye.
Take care. All right. Well, wow. This is a lot of stuff that you've got on my brain now, Bill. Honestly, it's.
Well, we've covered a lot of territory. Now, I've did a lot of interviews from all over the world of people that's called in, magazines, and there's not many media left. It seems like sometimes that we haven't been on, but I think you fellas have the record for longevity. I've done a lot of hour interviews, but I can't ever remember doing a 2-hour interview. So I think you won the crown on that.
Yeah. Very good. Well, we're the king of paranormal entertainment radio. Well, we've got about 6 minutes left. Do you have any final thoughts or anything, Bill, that you want to share with us? Anything?
Well, I'd like to share this. Elvis means more to me than just the Elvis as a live side of him. I think Elvis was a great man. He was human. He had his faults. I believe Elvis Presley was a born-again Christian man. J.D. Sumner, who sung with gospel quartets for years, tells me of how that practically every night after a concert, Elvis would want to gather around the piano and unwind, and he would sing gospel quartets till daylight. There were times, he said, he would see Elvis on his knees praying and crying, saying that he was not happy with his lifestyle and some of the things he did. Elvis was generous beyond any description. The fact was known, he probably gave away as much money as he spent to different charities and relatives and friends and poor people. There was a movie called Walking Tall about the sheriff in Tennessee, Buford Pusser. I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And the mob killed him. Well, in real life, they burnt down his home, and he didn't have any insurance. And it was not known till years after Elvis's funeral and after Buford had died that when his home was burned down, Elvis called him up and said, "Is it true you had no insurance when the mob burned your house down?" And the sheriff said, "Yes, that's true." And Elvis said, "Well, I'll tell you what, Sheriff, I'm going to do. I'm going to build your house better than the one you lost. I'm going to pay for insurance on it for it this time. And I just have one condition. I don't want you to ever mention it to a soul as long as you live until after you're dead. I don't want the news to come out." And he did build a house, and Buford wrote it in his diary. And after the mob killed Buford Pusser, which they did, it came out in a diary that Elvis had built the house. But Elvis never wanted any notoriety. Few people knew that he did a concert and gave $50,000 to the Phoenix, Arizona memorial down in Pearl Harbor. He bought Elvis. He bought President Theodore Roosevelt. He bought his yacht and gave it to the Jerry Lewis kids. And he was always doing things like that, but he would never let them tell who did it. He was offered the option of going and entertaining at Army bases instead of being drafted, and he turned it down and said, I'll go in like every other soldier and pull my KP duty. And I appreciated Elvis for what he was and the man that he was.
Yeah, you hear stories about him giving away brand new Cadillacs. I think one of the stories I heard was he'd given away so many Cadillacs that Cadillac company said, Elvis, we're not going to sell you any more this year.
Yeah. He gave away over something like 105 Cadillacs and Lincoln limousines.
Wow.
And it was, for the most part, people that could not afford them.
Yeah.
He saw a black lady looking in a car window, a Cadillac show window, and he said, Mama, what are you doing? Said, you going to buy a car? And she said, no. Said, I got this old flivver out here, and pointed to an old Model T Ford or Model A Ford, and she said, I never in my lifetime buy a car like that. He said, well, you don't have to buy it. It's going to be bought for you. Come on in, Mama. And he went in, bought her the car, and she drove off in it.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
When he was a little kid, his mother said that they'd be worrying about how her and her husband, Vernon, was going to pay the $3 light bill. And Elvis would say, Mama, when I get big, I'm going to make a lot of money, and I'm going to buy you all the groceries you want, and I'm going to pay the light bill, and I'm going to get a big Cadillac, a pink Cadillac, and buy for you when I get grown. And he kept his word, she said, and the first thing he did, he bought a Cadillac for her, even though she didn't have a driver's license and couldn't drive.
Wow.
When he bought Graceland for $97,000, he brought the cash in his blue jeans.
Huh.
One time he went into a Cadillac dealership and had his blue jeans on, a sweatshirt, and the car dealers wouldn't give him the time of day. They were all in the back playing cards. And one of them said, boy, we don't allow no loafing here. So he said, where's the manager? And he said, well, he's upstairs, but don't bother him. Well, Elvis bolted upstairs, went in the manager's office, said, do you want to sell that car, one of those cars down there? And he said, yes. And he said, well, I tried to buy one from your salesman, and they tried to run me off. Said, I'll buy one on one condition. Said that they don't get a cent of the commission. Said there's an old man washing the windows of the showroom. I want him to get the commission. Said, now, if you want to sell one on that basis, I'll buy it. And started pulling out $100 bills. And the manager's eyes bugged out and said, boy, you got a deal. So the old man, he like to had a heart attack when they came out counting out the money for his commission. He was out there washing the windows.
Well,
but
Bill,
that was Elvis.
Well, Bill, it's been a pleasure. I'm sorry we're out of time. I'd love to spend another 2 hours with you sometime in the future, hopefully. But,
okay. Well, I certainly appreciate the invitation.
And we'll definitely check out your book and tell everyone that we know to do the same thing.
All right. If you get in our area, come by and I'll buy you lunch.
All right. Good deal. Thanks a lot, Bill. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that was Bill Beeny. I'm sorry. Oh, my gosh. Yeah, all this construction up, and you still hear all these wonderful noises, don't you? Yeah, we're still constructing, but we ran over our time by about a minute, guys, so we're going to have to get out of here. This is Jay Scott.
Chuck Browder.
And I guess we'll see you guys next week. Who do we have next week?
I'm not sure offhand.
I don't know either. Check the site, guys, and you can find out who we've got coming on next week. I'm just going to keep talking, though, because I'm going to run over until I find out who it is, because I honestly do not know. Let me see here. We're going to get all this nasty noise coming on the site, probably. Oh, come on. The internet, it's so slow tonight. You'll probably hear all this noise going, all this crazy stuff going on. What'd you think of that, Chuck? Think it's a good guess?
Oh, that was a thick interview, man. There was all sorts of information, man. And you just filled up the entire 2 hours with chock full of stuff. I mean, the Lisa Marie thing alone. You know.
Oh, I know, man. I know, dude. We could have gone 2 hours just based on that, and we may do that again. Next week, we have Prophet Yahweh, the man that can call UFOs down from the sky. If you guys haven't seen his video of live doing this on an ABC affiliate, you need to check it out. It is some freaky stuff. Anyway, until next time, until next week when Trent will be back with us and Chuck will be producing once more. I'm Jay Scott again, your only JD DJ on the OmniSound Radio 1 network.
Thank you for having me again, Scott.
Oh, yes, anytime. Oh, check out our Alice Cridge interview from the Board Queen. She's from Silent Hill. That's up in the archives now. We did a special run of that show on Saturday with no announcement. But anyway, guys, it's a lot of fun. We're going to make room for the guys from Georgia coming up next at you, okay? Take care. Out There Radio is coming up right after this. See ya.